So when do you start your breeding season?
I started pairing them up. It takes me a couple weeks to get it all done. I really don't like January hatches just because of the weather, but if I don't start early, then when I do want them, I don't have them set up.
Yeah, it always seems the same thing. It always seems like to start in December and running into January. Where I'm at, we'll get down into the negatives a few more times, and it just seems kind of rough. But they always seem to do good.
Yeah, they if you're doing club racing, I'm a big fan of what's called the light dark system. That works best with January hatches, but I'm not doing club racing anymore. So
You're just doing one loft stuff.
well, often I test all my own. I have a testing program, so basically it's like a one loft race, and I'm the only guy that enters it.
So
Yeah.
I'm dying for this part, man. Have you guys talked at all yet, or?
No,
Did you get that pedigree set up? Pause there. Hey, Dave.
yes,
Yeah. So, small world, man. I talked to you on Sunday.
oh, you're the one that found the bird. Oh yeah, I did send the pedigree out. And when you said pedigree, I think you were talking to Phil. Yes, yeah, I sent it out on Monday. So I don't know, mail takes about a week, so you should get it this week sometime.
I was just pulling your leg. I thought that was great. I told Phil, I caught a new bird today. Kind of tell him about it, and he goes, "What's the guy's name?" I told him your last name, and he goes, "David." I said, "Yeah, I think that's him." He goes, "We're talking to him on Tuesday." Cool.
Wow, wow, I never connected the dots. Even when you said, "Did I send the pedigree?" I thought you were talking to Phil. So yeah, no, I mailed it out Monday, so hard to say, but sometime probably Thursday or Friday.
Oh, it's all good. I just thought that was super cool. We were chuckling about that. I said, I wonder if he knows.
Oh, what are the odds, man? What a small world, really.
Oh yeah.
Because
Yeah,
that was
it's
a lot of
that-
birds in that race.
That's funny. And there were several of them that came in, and I have that happen about once every 2 weeks on Sunday.
Huh.
There's something I've been told by the local racers not to release in Miami because it's a treacherous sucker, and that you lose a lot of birds on that release point.
They did. About a third of them, I think, got home.
Wow.
Well, I was watching the numbers on that, and I don't know. You tell me what you think, but it seemed like they lost kind of a third on every race, didn't they?
Well, anytime you go into Arizona like that, it depends on winds and which way they go. But if they go south, why, it's history. There's just nothing there for them to recover with. And so I like the race, and I like the way it's managed. It's a course that I'm not particularly fond of, but you kind of have to go with what you got available.
Gotcha. Yeah, that was something I thought was kind of interesting because I'm pretty much directly east of where they turn them loose, and I'm on the from the valley. I'm on the front side of that mountain. The Superstition Mountains is where I'm at, and they traveled across really nasty mountains to get to my house.
So I'm not quite sure what that bird did. My guess is he went off in the wrong direction and was working his way back to figure out where he was. Shouldn't take him a day, 15 hours or whatever to go 100 miles, but it's hard to say. We had a one loft race here in California last year where they put GPS units on them, and you come home to see the data, but it was pretty fascinating. Some birds came straight home. I had two birds in the race. They came straight as a line, but they still were like, I don't know, the upper 25%, but way back from the winners. And one guy's bird, actually several guys' birds, came about halfway and then just went crazy, circling, going in all kinds of different directions. They flew about 100 miles in all kinds of different directions and then came back. Continued the race. So for 150-mile race, they travel probably 400 miles. So it's hard to say what these birds do when we let them go.
It's weird.
Well, yours isn't the first one that I've had trap in.
Huh.
I got one a month ago, Phil, from a guy in Fountain Hills.
You had a whole flock join up with your stuff there.
Yeah, I got a pretty good video of that. Looked like 40 rolling pigeons in the air, but you could tell half of them were blue. Yeah, I caught. Who was it? I don't remember the guy's name. Not off the top of my head. But anyway, he was over there in Fountain Hills, about 35 miles from me. But they had that was the last training toss, so they must have done that out in Florence, which is probably the right mileage. He gave me the standard answer: do what you wish with him. I don't know. I don't have any idea knowing which bird that was. So do what you wish. So
ordinarily I enter crosses, but this year my health hasn't been so hot, and I got kind of behind. And so I promised Timmerman I'd send him 4. So I sent him 4, but I had to send basically inbreds that I was using, matings that I was going to test out and use for my own replacements. So you got a straight bred de Clack Jansen.
Wow, it's a sure pretty.
Yeah, I just thought that was hilarious, man. He was telling me about it because he does a lot of birds. When he's flying his birds, will just join up with his stuff. And he told me, he's like, man, I got this, like, it's a racing pigeon. I looked it up on the chart and you can see what it's done. And I'm like, that's pretty cool, man. What's the name on it? And he's like, Shewmaker. I'm like, what's his first name? He's like, Dave. I was like, there's no way.
Yeah, that is just too. I mean, he called me and I thanked him for looking me up, because you always appreciate knowing where these birds that don't come back went.
Right, yeah.
He said he had rollers, so I said, well, just take it, out to the grocery store and let it go, and let's hope it flies home. And then I got to thinking, he said in passing he also had a few racers, so I called him back and I said, well, if you want it, you can have it, because I'm not gonna. I'd just soon you have it as me fly it home, ship it home. And he said, sure. So that's great, perfect, good, happy ending.
Oh, that's too cool. All right, well, let's open this up here. Hello and welcome to the All About Pigeons podcast. I'm Phil.
I'm Chris.
And today we have with us David Shewmaker. He's been an animal breeder for over 60 years. Interested in genetics at the age of 9, he graduated from the University of California with a Bachelor of Science in Genetics. Former director of the Pricing Products for Genetic Engineering. Established the first flock of racing pigeons in 1985. Today he operates a Shewmaker Genetics in California, maintaining over a dozen inbred lines, and does contemporary group performance testing with about 1,000 birds each year. He's also the author of the book Genetics in Racing, 20 Essential Concepts for Breeding Champions. And he's written many articles and recently been inducted into the AU Hall of Fame. David, thanks for coming on with us today and sharing some of your knowledge and experiences with us.
My pleasure.
I'll even just say for myself here, genetics they always seem to go over my head. I'll listen to 2 guys talking, and about 2 or 3 minutes in the conversation, I'm out of it. So can you just kind of give us an easy opener into genetics?
Sure. 100% of everything about birds, humans, animals, plants is genetic. However, how much of that is actually expressed is influenced by the environment. So a bird's ability to race is got tremendous genetic factors that come into play, but those factors can be dwarfed by the environment. And if the environment is absolutely perfect, then 100% of that genetic influence can be expressed. So when you talk about racing pigeons, and racing pigeons is what kind of pigeon I'm most interested in. You talk to racing pigeon fanciers, they all have all kinds of ideas about how to look at a pigeon and tell if it's a good racer. The fact of the matter is there's probably 100 genes that are involved in determining race performance ability in pigeons. And the only real true test is to fly them in races and to look at the results. And the results that you get, if you have a bird, let's say, that wins the combine, that's great. But in order to say whether that was dumb luck or a factor of genetics, the data is just a little bit too lean. And so you need to have some more data to really conclude whether it was genetics that made the difference or whether it was just a lucky day for the bird. But if you get enough data, the basket will tell you which your best birds are genetically.
That makes 100% sense. That's the best explanation I've heard so far.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people love to say, "Oh, I can handle the bird and tell who the good one's going to be." And there's times when you need that skill. Maybe you're at an auction of a great fancier who's died and it's his estate sale, and his family has no records of any kind. They just have the birds. Well, then handling is probably important. But if you have any opportunity at all to get to data, that data is 1,000 times more valuable than anything anybody can do by handling the bird or looking at the eye or looking at the throat or anything else like that.
And you're talking about by pulling race sheets and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, basically looking at race results to the same loft. So let's pretend I'm in a club and we have a 20 bird limit, and I take my 20 birds and we've got 15 other guys in the club and they bring their 20 birds. So we've got 300 birds in the race, and let's say I get first place. I can brag about getting first place in the club, but the only result that really has merit as a genetic measure is how did that bird do coming to my loft. So I would give that bird first place out of 20, or what we call a UPR of 0.05. And basically that's a percentile ranking. And the reason we do that is because that's the only way to normalize the environmental factors. Those 300 birds are fed different ways. The winds were different. Some of them had sickness, some of them didn't. The only loft where all the environmental factors were approximately equal is the loft that bird flew to. Yeah, and yes, your question, I look over the course of the whole season and look at the UPR to my loft of all my birds, and I'm looking for birds that either are consistent, which is a desirable thing, or really scored very well, statistically abnormally well compared to the other birds.
Is that like you were talking about earlier with your own style of a one loft race?
Yeah, because I'm a geneticist, I have all kinds of quirky things I do that other people aren't going to do. And one of them is that I'm very interested in these results to the loft, but with a club racing limit of 20 birds, if you raise very many birds, it's not very hard to have more birds than you have available in the club to race. And so what I started doing probably 25 years ago was doing my own, what I call contemporary group testing, where basically I have a test barn and I wean about 30 birds a week. And every month, all the birds weaned that month go into one pen, and that's a single test group. Think of it as a one loft race, and I'm the only guy entering the one loft race. And then I have another pen where the next month's weanings go into it. So I have about 8 of these one loft races that I conduct during the course of a year. And the birds that graduate from that, then I carry the very best. Well, I stock a few for various reasons, but then the very best ones I carry over the following year, which I try to take out to 5 and in some cases 600 miles. But to your comment, you're exactly right. That's all so I can get data on these birds racing under conditions where they're all going to the same loft, so that the environmental factors are kind of neutralized or normalized, so they're basically all the same.
It's kind of what I've been doing. I don't have pens of 30, but when I started breeding racers, I haven't raced yet, but I keep track of all of them. I know. I can kind of know which one's going to be home first and which one doesn't dawdle. You know, it's who traps the best and who drops first, and those are two different birds. It's something I pay attention to. But I've been kind of picking the ones I want to breed for this coming year when we actually race. I've been picking from those, and that's the only real information I have on the birds. I mean, I've got race sheets from their parents and stuff. That seems like the way I would do it too.
Yeah, it's another thing that a lot of people do, which I really advocate against is breeding for stock. There's a place for it every now and then. If you get somebody gifts you a really old cock, for example, and he's almost sterile, and you're able to get 2 babies off of him. Why, yeah, you can stock those right away because you may never get another chance. But ordinarily, when you stock a bird without getting race data, you have about a 90% chance that it's going to step you in the wrong direction. So many of these genes that are involved that if you really want to improve, you need to limit your selection certainly to the top 20%. I think the top 5%, and in my case, I try to limit my selection to the top 1 or 2%. And by doing that, you'll make much faster progress. So back to the bred for stock, if you breed a bird for stock, oh, this handles great, I got to stock this bird. I say you got about a 90% chance that bird is not high enough on the bell curve of genetic qualities to actually move your loft forward. So when I get a bird, let's say I spent a lot of money on a new family, which I recently did. And so I bought a pair of birds from a line that I have an interest in. And so last year I paired the 2 of them up and they raised 12 babies. I stocked every one up as an insurance policy in case one of the 2 I purchased died, for example. And now this year, I'm going to take those 12 plus the 2 originals, that's 14 birds, and I'm going to make a dozen or so matings, some between themselves and some to my other birds of a similar family, and test them in my contemporary group program. And then the ones that test high, I will keep and all that stuff, but their parents will then get a high score as breeders, and the ones that don't test well, their parents will get scores as not so good breeders. And then those 12 that I stocked will be culled based on those who are able to produce birds that fly, and I'll cull the ones that produce average or less than average birds. Kind of in summary, breeding for stock is something you will want to do from time to time, but you really don't want to do it very often. And when you're buying a bird that has 3 generations of bred for stock, I wouldn't waste your money.
Right, yeah. It's the same way with rollers too, as I understand it. Not everything is meant to be bred.
Yeah.
They may fly great, but you put 2 of them together and you get a train wreck. That's why record keeping is important to me.
And it sounds like you do some really meticulous record keeping. I mean, are you doing this on like a software, or you got clipboards on every cage, or how are you doing this?
I was a software engineer, database architect for 40 some years in my career. I got a pretty elaborate software system that when you write software, you never like to write the same function twice. In other words, every program has to have a login. So you write that once and you just keep reusing it. So this program I have is 40 years of code that I've accumulated in my profession, and I just used it to write a pigeon program that's specific for me.
Oh, that's cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So I mean, there's the kind of the talk about bloodlines versus race sheets. You're clearly going by what the birds actually do. It's kind of like you said, how do you judge a bird? You see what it does.
Yes, but let me make sure I didn't mislead you. There's a common phrase people like to use of breed best to best. And what that means is you breed a cock with a good record to a hen of a good record. And that's decent advice to a point, but there's 2 ways that can be done. One way is you go and buy the best cock you can find in your city or Northern California or the US or the world or whatever the case may be, and then you find a similar best hen you can find. So maybe you wind up getting the cock from Indiana and the hen from Washington, and you put them together because they got great records. Well, there's a problem with that approach in that the 2 birds are so unrelated that you're going to get a gene pool, a resulting gene pool, which is very wide and diverse. So you're going to get a lot of variation in the offspring that they produce. Another way to do best to best is best to best within a given family. So let's say you have Hubans. To take the best Huban cock and breed it to the best Huban hen is going to still be best to best, but now you're going to get a much narrower gene pool with much less variation, and so you'll get more birds of a higher caliber if the mating's a good mating. Now, if it's a bad mating and just not one, like you said, with your rollers, it didn't work out right. You get a lot of uniformly bad birds. But I prefer best to best, but best to best within families. Now, there's a problem with that approach in that the more you do that, the more inbred your families become. And the more inbreeding that occurs, the less vitality birds have. It's called inbreeding depression. You get to a point where that is a real handicap for the bird in a racing environment. And there's a real easy fix for that. You have two families and you breed them within the families to keep your breeders, but when you breed your racers, whether it's a one loft race or club racing, you cross those two families, you immediately get 100% of the return of the vigor, hybrid vigor it's called, and you get a very uniform product. So if you've selected and bred your families right, you get a uniform crop of good racing birds. Now, if you didn't do it right, you'll get a uniform crop of average birds or a uniform crop of poor birds. But that's the goal to which I think is the most attractive breeding plan.
And that makes sense. That's real results right there. Yeah.
At what age do you start young birds? What age do you start to gauge the results?
Everything is a puzzle. It's like playing a game where there's a big black box and you're trying to figure out what's inside the black box and you get clues. Every observation that I make that I think is noteworthy, I record in my computer. And sometimes they're just meaningless observations that have no genetic basis, but I don't know that at the time. But I record everything. So for example, when I do my contemporary group testing and I let them out, let's say for the first time they go away from home, and let's say one bird comes home all by himself 15 minutes from anybody else, I'll record that because that's noteworthy. Now, it may be a fluke, or it also may be a little hint as to something that's there. And if it's a hint of something that's there that's real, I'll have other noteworthy observations during the course of that bird's testing program. I generally have this rule that if something is really noteworthy once, that gets my attention, but it's probably a fluke. If it happens twice, now it's maybe the real McCoy. If it happens 3 times, I can generally take it to the bank.
Makes a lot of sense. When you said inbred depression, I was going to say then that would be the opposite of hybrid vigor.
Yes, exactly. So if you have an inbreeding coefficient of 1, that means the bird is 100% homozygous at all the genes, and it is going to be very frail because it has almost no vitality, because the vitality comes from a certain diversity in the genes. And 100% or 0% inbreeding would be 100% of the genes are heterozygous. And everything in between is a variation of one extreme or another. But in general, even though inbreeding depression is a real thing, and people do need to be aware of it, it's not nearly the problem most people think. Most people aren't doing enough inbreeding or close enough inbreeding for it to be as big an issue as they think is going on. When you get your pedigree, Chris, you'll notice that this is an inbred bird. He didn't win the race, but I don't think it was inbreeding that kept him from winning. I think he didn't have the right genes for that kind of a race. He's more of a sprint bird. Inbreeding to some degree gives you the advantage of uniformity in the results in the offspring. And in my program, if I have an inbred bird that I test, I can bring it back into that family. If I cross it, I never breed them back into the program because while they may have a great record, they've introduced so much variation into the gene pool that I'll spend years getting that uniformity restored.
Yeah, you'd be working to get that 25% out for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's again, it's like bred for stock. There's a time to do an outcross, but I don't think you want to do it willy-nilly every time. Best to best certainly makes more sense than cock to hen, just random mating. But best to best with your outcrosses, I think, is a little bit of a fool's errand because you introduce so much variation that now instead of getting a good one every 10 out of 100, it might be 1 out of 100 or 1 out of 1,000.
Right. And see, I think Ryan told us that too, right? If you see bred for stock, bred for stock, bred for stock, you probably shouldn't monkey with that one.
Yeah, that's what he was saying. Yep.
Even if it's free, I wouldn't want it.
Gotcha.
So I get your method about how you breed. Do you have any methods like line breeding or circle breeding that you kind of stick with, or is it's all based off of your results?
Well, as a breeder, you've got a number of tools. Inbreeding and line breeding is just a form of inbreeding. So inbreeding and line breeding are used to basically keep the gene pool narrow or to narrow it further so that you get uniformity. Crossbreeding is what I talked about, taking two different families to immediately get 100% restoration of that vigor, and you use that for racing. Another tool you have is outcrossing, which is a little bit different than crossbreeding. Outcrossing is when you've got these inbred families and you've reached a plateau. In other words, you've gotten them so uniform that there's not enough variation for you to improve any further. And that's not good. So you need to have uniformity, but with enough variation that you can continue to improve. So from time to time, with these various inbred lines, we will do an outcross, the idea being to introduce a little bit more genetic variability so that we can continue and improve. And so I use all four of those different programs.
And it just strikes me because you hear all the time about record keeping is key, and your record keeping is like extreme. You're really picking every detail and picking the best of the best, and traits that you see, like you're saying, even making notes on certain ones. And and that's kind of where I feel like really genetics and using your method, like how Chris was saying too, you can scale it to anything. You don't have to have 1,000 birds. Anybody can apply this to their racers, rollers, high flyers, fancy birds, any traits that they want to see, they can kind of put back into and work with.
Yeah, it's all genetic. It's just that the environment really clouds your view. Certain things kind of normalize that environmental factor out of there. But you name me any trait, and I will tell you there's a genetic component. Now, some traits, let's just take human eye color, for example. That's mostly genetic, but there's some environmental influence during embryonic development and so on. Body weight is got a genetic component, but that's a huge environmental factor as well. And so what your genetic predisposition for body weight is really hard to measure because it's so severely impacted by what we eat and exercise and things like that.
You remember when we were talking about our little wannabe one loft race?
Yeah. Run it by David and see what he thinks.
Phil and I were talking about, like, say, about 5 of us guys putting 5 birds in each of us guys' loft. So say take a total of 25 birds from each loft, split them up, and then we would hold our own little races. And because we all live pretty far apart. Phil's probably 200 miles from me. We were gonna, fly out each other's birds and just fly for bragging rights or whatever. And I decided that after thinking about that long and hard, the one thing that I know for sure that it would show us is whose loft practices are working better.
Yeah, that probably would.
That's it would definitely show who because the difference between the breeder and the feeder.
Well, that's an interesting point you make, because a lot of what I write and stuff, I have to caution people that when you read this, understand I'm trying to select the top 1%. Most of you guys are trying to create a team, and you're going to race for 12 weeks or 8 weeks, whatever the case may be, and you want that team, you want a drop of 20 on every race. That's what you're shooting for. And those are two totally different objectives. So in my case, I don't baby mine at all. They get basically every toss is hard but fair. If you're trying to develop a team of young birds, you'll train them as a unit. You'll give them multiple releases at the same station to really hammer into their brain where it is from here to home. And when you succeed in doing that, and you got this wonderful young bird team that gives you 20 birds on the drop every time, you're going to win champion loft and all of that, but you're going to have almost no data as to who's genetically the best of your birds, because you basically melded them into a single unit, and their individual differences are going to be hard to measure. So you have to look at just every possible angle and make sure that what you think you're doing is what you're trying to do.
Sure. On one team, okay, and this is something probably everybody that wants to race should know, and I don't think we've asked this before, how many miles do you put on training a single team of birds in the season?
So my contemporary group training, testing, again, remember I raise 1,000 birds a year. I'm looking to keep the top 2%. So basically that's a really small number. And so the program consists of 3 phases. Phase 1 used to be what I called 60 by 60. Now it's closer to 90 by 90. What that means is I get them out to 90 miles by 90 days of age. And the ones that graduate from that then go to phase 2, which generally goes out to about 300 miles, maybe 350 if the weather cooperates. And then the ones that graduate from that will be held over for the following year for phase 3, where I try to get them out to at least 400, hopefully 5, and in some cases 600 miles. And then that's kind of the final cut. And then those are the ones that go into my breeding program. And of course, once they get into the breeding program, it's a new test because now everybody that races well doesn't breed well. So now we're trying to find out who are the birds that breed the birds that do well in the testing program. So having said all that, I need to tell you a little story about what happened to me probably 15 years ago. A fellow in our club needed some young birds. He had a loft, but he had no birds to fly. And so I gave him about 60 birds. And basically, every nest, I kept one and gave him one. And it was just totally random, no pre-selecting or anything. Just every time I weaned a pair of birds, I kept one and I put one in a pen for him. And he raced his 60 birds in the combine, in the club of the combine, in a fairly traditional young bird sense. And I took mine through my 60, back then it was 60 miles by 60 days, my 60 by 60 program. And at the end of the season, he had combine young bird of the year, and its nestmate was the top bird in my 30 by 30 program, or 60 by 60 program. And when we looked further, the birds that he lost at 100 miles, I lost at 5 miles. The birds that he lost at 200 miles, I lost at 20. In other words, the parallels were unbelievable. And that's what I really got serious about, taking this phase 1 of my testing program and putting a lot of weight into it. What it means is birds that graduate at the top of my 60 by 60 or my 90 by 90 are good birds. However, I probably have lost some good birds along the way that had they been coddled a little bit more, given a little bit more of a chance to mature, they would have matured and been excellent racers. But there's no question that birds that impress you early are giving you hints of what their potential will be. Now, having said all of that, there's a big difference between racing to 60 or 90 miles and 300 miles. There's a certain bird that can go 4 hours on the wing that can't do 10 hours or 6 hours on the wing. And so you got to be careful that you do test them out to the 300 and 400, 500, 600, depending what you're trying to do. But those early races, they'll give you a real insight into the potentially the best birds you've got.
And I noticed that on those 2 birds you had left there, when I was looking at the California Classic, that one bird was consistently faster than the other one.
Yes, he was. Now there's another one that got lost. I had 3 birds until I think he was lost in the main race, and he was the best of the 3 in terms of results. But like I say, I was sick, and so I didn't really get to set my matings like I normally do. So all 3 were rather highly inbred, and I figured, well, I told him I'd send 4, so let me send them in. It was kind of an experiment to see, well, just how well do they do. And it's a small data set, so it's really hard to say, but they didn't do as poorly as I think a lot of people would have expected, giving their breeding coefficient.
Right. No, I was talking with another friend of mine, and he said that even the slower birds were faster than most of the birds in this club. They're averaging
it's hard to say.
11.
Yeah, it's so hard to say. I mean, the bird that won that race,
yards.
my bird that lost, he's a friend of mine. And if you look up the bird's result, it was like 900th and 700th and 500th of the other races. So he probably had a certain skill set that wasn't important in the other races that was rather important in this one. And or he had a stroke of luck. Like I say, one result could very well just be dumb luck. Yeah, that's why you have to look for multiple occurrences. Now, an interesting point. How do you do that in a one loft race where it's one race, the bird comes home? Well, you can look for, and again, this works with families. It doesn't work when you're out crossing. You look for patterns among relatives. So if this bird that my friend has that won the race, let's suppose that last year he was 10th in a one loft race with the same mating. And the year before, he had a good one loft result with a bird sired by the same father. So those are the kind of relations that are still meaningful. So when I get 3 or more of those, that's almost as good as the bird doing 3 of his own.
That makes total sense. They either got it or they don't. And families that got it, you're gonna get that. You're gonna see that with the results for sure.
Yeah, the problem is that, even Tiger Woods, when he was at the absolute top of his game, he didn't win every week.
No.
Maybe, I don't know what it was, half the time, a third of the time, or whatever, but it was just way off the chart, more frequent than anybody else. But he didn't win every week. And a baseball hitter doesn't hit 1,000. So these birds, it's the same thing. And you've got to get a lot of data and sort through it, throw out your biases, and find out who the ones are that have a true genetic difference. And then you keep those and go forward.
It's very cool. Well, we are definitely coming up on the clock here. Dave, this has been awesome. I really like hearing your method. I really like that a lot. I think that is something that a lot of people can, take on in their own way. And it goes back to just being really meticulous about it and paying attention to your birds and what they're doing. I really like that a lot. Thanks for sharing that. Definitely.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it. I guess if I was to leave you with one piece of advice for your listeners, it would be that we are our own worst enemy. Our biases are the biggest thing that's holding us back. We're keeping a bird that we either paid a lot of money for, or it's off of a bird that's world famous. We just need to forget all those things and look at the results and look at them with as even-keeled, objective view as we can. And we'll make mistakes, but you'll make more progress doing that than any other approach.
Check out his website. It's shewmaker.com, SHEWMAKER.com, and you can take a look at some of the stuff he's talking about here and also find his book. Yeah, definitely. Thanks for coming on, Dave. This has been great. We're going to have you come back on again because, we got kind of carried away with it, but yeah, you're full of great information.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
It's been a fun one for sure. Or if you find one of his birds, look up his band number, and you can call him directly. But that's like a secret message thing. So
right,
you might get lucky.
Very lucky.